You might have seen part of this story, but let's slow it down. You may remember Colonel Karl Nell from my previous episode on him. He's an AI, machine learning, military intelligence, aerospace, communications, defense contracting, weapons system development and recovery, combat commander, engineering expert, who served those positions and industries primarily at the very top of each of them. Colonel Karl Nell is without a doubt one of the most highly placed insiders that has come out with direct disclosure statements on record in recent years. And at the 2024 Assault Conference in New York, he once again came out with some extremely significant statements that rival or even surpass in significance those he made previously. Here he is with a very blunt, straightforward answer to Assault moderator Alex Klokas' question of, do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
So, non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
Then, when Nell was asked how confident he is in the truth of this staggering statement,
there's zero doubt.
I don't care what anyone says, that has to be one of, if not the most significant disclosure moments in human history, right there. And despite it only being a very short 20-minute showing at the 2024 Assault Conference, his zero doubt about NHI interacting with human activity and government insiders knowing about it statement was far from the only one of significance made by the Colonel that night. No, he had more to say. Much more to say. You can see why Karl Nell is one of those guys who is so brilliant and in demand that he reportedly makes those around him nervous from the sheer extraordinary potential he brings to the table with his high level of intelligence and towering career CV. And I'd bet my morning coffee this is especially true for those at the very top of those aerospace, defense, and intelligence industries that he has worked in his entire career.
So I was fortunate. I had a 4-year ROTC scholarship to Penn. I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. The Army sent me overseas to do signal corps engineering projects. So I did a lot of strategic comm projects in Europe. I ended up working in Army Space Command. I commanded a satellite ground station, war trace to the Joint Chiefs. I spent some time at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The Army ultimately sent me to get a master's in mechanical engineering, a master's in strategic studies, graduate work in computer science. I was on track to stay in, but I decided that I wanted to pursue more of a technical career. So I got out and ended up working at Bell Labs, which was a fantastic place. I left Bell Labs and ended up working in Lockheed Missiles and Space. I worked at Northrop Grumman. I've ran strategic technology programs in the defense industry, worked for a lot of the three-letter agencies, ultimately was a deputy chief of staff or deputy CTO for a $2 billion company. I was a vice president general manager of a Northern Virginia-based R&D firm. I stayed in the military, in the reserve. I commanded at every grade level through brigade. I was fortunate to stand up the Army's newest expeditionary MI brigade. I was the deputy chief of staff for combatant command. Ultimately, this experience sort of combined to give me the opportunity to come in and advise Army Futures Command, the largest reorganization in the Army Reserve since really 1973, on how the Army could be more effective. And my last assignment was involved with the UAP task force, which maybe is the most apropos for this discussion.
Now, as I've said before, if anyone is in the know about the NHI reality, it's someone exactly like, or actually would be, Colonel Karl Nell. And as he just stated, higher forms of NHI exist. So not dogs or dolphins here, higher than man's intelligence. Its interaction with humanity has been ongoing for a very long time, and unelected officials in the US government know this for a fact. And it's not just because he says so.
Anybody paying attention realizes the government has already indicated that unidentified anomalous phenomena are real, they're not ours, and they're not our adversaries. The Pentagon has said that. Like, for people that are paying attention, like, that shoe already dropped.
It blows my mind that mainstream media hasn't covered any of Colonel Karl Nell's statements, like, at all. And regardless of whatever side of the debate you're on here, don't you think that's just a little weird? It's as if they very clearly didn't want to bring any attention to this event and his statements. Because no matter how you slice it or look at it, this is such a what the moment in history that is so blatantly being ignored that it's actually a joke. And I can already hear the debunkers and the doubters saying, because there's no proof, bro. Right. Okay. One more time for those simple-minded folks. Every single thing related to this topic, especially everything that is clearly definitive in its imagery or details of anything like recovered craft or incremental science breakthroughs or facility locations or incident details around military assets or installations ad nauseum is all classified, like deep, waived, unacknowledged special access program plus bigot list type classified. And we are never going to find that info unless the whole system melts down, implodes, or Congress can compel people to come forward through legislation like what was written in the Schumer Amendment NDAA language. And just in case you're unaware, check out my episode on the Cluster F, that is the clearance and classification system in the US. I'll link that below. You'll see how the whole system has people, and more concerning, vast swaths of the government fooled into believing that everything is exactly what they say it is, going simply on their classified need-to-know words. I do get it though. It's a new paradigm that some folks may have difficulty accepting. And if that's you, then Colonel Nell has some words for anyone who may be struggling to accept a new paradigm like this.
From a first principles standpoint, what's so unusual about this realization? There's billions of stars in the galaxy. Life here evolved in 500 million years, which is basically a blink of an eye. We've found planets around every star that we've looked at. It's likely that the universe is full of life.
Because either you can read the giant writing that's been all over the walls and in books for decades and think critically about that information and evidence, or you believe everything you're being told about it by the status quo factions of our government and its colluding corporate mainstream media pets on a leash. Which do you believe? But don't feel bad if you're the latter type. Most people are simply too busy with life to do their homework and won't believe anything they hear about this subject until the president literally trots out on national TV holding hands with an alien or shows a high-resolution picture of one of the UFOs that's floating in a hangar at Lockheed, or the local nightly news flashes a verified high-resolution picture or video of an alien body. And if that's you, then again, that's okay. But you should probably click back over to Fox or CNN or your local nightly news, because clearly you're not going to be happy until you see that happen. And maybe this topic just isn't for you yet. From my previous clearance and classifications episode, we know the hard evidence is classified, and we know anyone working within a bigoted top secret compartmented information level program who reveals classified info in the wrong way could be jailed for life or killed legally. So short of catastrophic disclosure happening in some awesome way, I'd bet we probably aren't going to get a good peek at anything that will blow our hair back anytime soon. But what I don't get is why? Why do certain factions within the government cabal insist on trying to hide all this from us? What are they so afraid of? And there's a million tin hat theories, but the explanation from the colonel puts it down to 6 main reasons.
So there's 6 basic reasons, and this, again, you could draw this out from first principles. There's a national security reason. There's the lack of a plan. There's the potential for societal disruption. There's the possibility that there's some non-public agreement.
Wait. Hold the phone here. Some non-public agreement? With who? Is he saying the government has an agreement with NHI or extraterrestrials? Did Colonel Nell just validate one of the fringiest of the fringe theories in UFO lore, that there's a secret agreement between us, otherworld governments, and NHI or extraterrestrials not to divulge their existence on this planet? Or could it be he is referring to an agreement with someone else, like defense contractors? And I hope not, because that answer would actually be the most tragic, in my opinion. The government honoring an agreement with defense contractors to withhold this info so the military-industrial complex can milk the tech for weapons development a few more decades and continue to profit off driving our societies into more pointless wars. Because if that scenario is true at all, and we are that stupid as a species where we're willing to potentially extinct ourselves in the name of money, greed, and power, well, then we'd almost deserve it. But back to the Colonel's 6 reasons.
There's the potential for misdeeds and the desire to cover up misdeeds. And there's just the basic organizational intransigence and lack of priority that might be associated with the topic.
So here, he's basically admitting the government is potentially guilty of misdeeds. They are unwilling to change their status quo view on the subject, and in general, have no plan of how to deal with disclosure in any real capacity.
The issue is that really the national security issue subsumes all the others. And so there's an opportunity maybe to contract the national security issue similarly to what was done with nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, such that nuclear energy is not necessarily classified and is available to the public.
This is a great counterpoint to those hoarding gatekeepers inferring any and all information related to this topic must be kept under wraps or it risks national security. Really? All of it? Bullshit. Case in point, the nuclear programs of the early mid-20th century were, and are still rightly, some of the most highly classified programs in the world. And yet, they were able to peel off some of that technology and use it in energy production for the world. This feels like the most viable, responsible, and hopefully rational outcome in the short term for the justification of public disclosure. Leveraging some exotic world-changing tech from recovered NHI vehicles that has the potential to lift many billions out of poverty.
But lack of a plan and the potential for societal disruption are key ingredients that would prevent any responsible leader from coming forward with information that they don't have the means to address in a responsible way. It would be irresponsible to do that.
Now, I hear you, Colonel, but if they had a gun to their heads, I have no doubt that leaders of the world would come together and formulate a plan to disclose this reality in short order. For example, and you can agree or disagree on the execution, but look how relatively quickly those same world leaders came up with plans to deal with the COVID pandemic when it escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in late 2019, compared to the decades of ongoing coordinated and continued obfuscation around the UFO topic. There is obviously an ability to execute mass disclosure and dissemination of information to the public when absolutely necessary. So while I appreciate Colonel Nell and everything he's doing to support and push disclosure forward, I'd have to disagree somewhat and say that the lack of a plan excuse, while technically relevant, is a bit of a cop-out and making excuses for world leaders. And secondly, I don't believe that people would freak out to the point of mass societal collapse. This isn't a 1939 Halloween night reading by H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, when people freaked out, by the way, not because they were aliens, but because the story laid it out in a way that they were invading and destroying every major metropolitan area on the planet and killing everyone in their path. You could have substituted the Germans, the Soviets, or any world enemy for aliens in that scenario, and you would have had the same or probably even worse reaction from the public. And by the way, elephant in the room here, we all managed to live under a really effing sketchy, mutually assured destruction, hair trigger reality in life every damn day, which is crazy. But here we are. No, a modern, legitimate, coordinated worldwide rollout of this new reality done in an educated and educating way of delivery to the masses, I bet would be, by and large, well received by a vastly more mature and, by the way, prepared society. This whole "the public can't handle it" dialogue is nothing more than government nanny behavior. We are all humans, fundamentally equal at the DNA level. No one is above anyone else in our physical, literal ability to handle any such paradigm shift. Will there be a few bumps in the road? Sure. Will there be complete chaos and upheaval from an inability to digest it? No way. Because, like it or not, folks will still have to get up and go to work and get the kids to school the next day. We will accept it and move forward as a species just like we always have when we faced any major challenges or upheavals in our past. And accepting the NHI presence as reality is no different. Okay, now it has to be said here. Some may doubt Colonel Nell himself. Some could look at him and say, hey, he's part of the military-industrial complex and intelligence community machine that itself is the problem. Yes, he is. However, he's going bravely against the standard narrative from those sectors and almost single-handedly pushing the modern cutting edge of the disclosure narrative by himself. And this fact was apparent when he outlined why this new paradigm needs to be brought out into society, possibly hinting at his motives.
So the first issue is the moral right. The government exists for and by the people. And so the nature of reality is fundamentally not government information. People have a right to know the world in which we live, and the pursuit of happiness requires that knowledge.
I love that. The nature of reality is fundamentally not government information. People have a right to know the world in which we live, and the pursuit of happiness requires that knowledge. Thank you for saying this, Colonel Nell.
As a corollary to that, if there are misdeeds that were done, then they need to be remediated. If there's lack of proper oversight, which is suggested by some of the whistleblowers, that needs to be remediated.
Again, touching on those misdeeds, which for me, those misdeeds are most likely, as has been reported by some, to be the real reason that those holding these secrets don't want the reality of the situation to come out. Because what has likely been required and carried out under orders over the last many decades to keep this reality hidden constitutes crimes being committed. And according to more than a few of the whistleblowers, people have been killed to keep this and many other secrets hidden. Hell, it even says so right there in their NDA agreements they signed to obtain their clearance before they're even added onto any program bigot list. These gatekeepers, I'd bet mostly within the intelligence apparatus of the US government, are now scrambling to save their asses. Not because they actually believe we can't handle this new paradigm. That's just their limp D excuse. No, it's to save their asses from being strung up from the crimes they've committed. And oh boy, have they been committed. In 2021, it was reported by ISU, the official office designated as the watchdog over the intelligence wings of the federal government, that these agencies, by and large, no longer perform their duties of protecting our country as they should, and instead have mutated into the most egregious, power-hoarding tentacles that stretch all over the world. Astonishingly, deeper issues exist here.
The second issue is being in a reactive mode is never preferable to being in a proactive mode. So reactive mode is basically trying to prevent disclosure. Failing that, you might get a situation where you have catastrophic disclosure that creates all the problems that you were trying to prevent. So a more balanced middle path of controlled disclosure is the best way to do this, which is again an argument for some amount of disclosure.
Meaning, if there isn't a plan and the attempts to keep this greatest secret in human history under wraps fails, then it can trigger catastrophic disclosure and all the potential negative societal ramifications that go along with it if not handled correctly. So while it seems the gatekeepers have decided that we aren't ready or can't handle this reality, their actions are in fact pushing us faster towards the more severe outcomes that they are supposedly trying to prevent. Brilliant.
And the third part is simply societal advance and global competitiveness. More brain trust needs to be brought into this topic in order to make progress and to improve society.
One of the most refreshing threads of this discussion with Colonel Nell is him moving past whether or not the NHI phenomenon is real. And instead, he gets to the next phase, which is what are the potential implications of what all this means? And this is a severely needed shift in the dialogue to advance beyond ridiculing the topic as a whole and into the next paradigm of acceptance and deeper contemplation of this reality.
So for a lot of people, they think that the second shoe to drop is this is non-human intelligence, and maybe the conversation stops there. Like the president comes out and says, there's non-human intelligence. The truth is that will precipitate this crescendo of other questions that maybe the government's not ready to answer, that will court, if not precipitate, potential negative ramification for society.
This isn't going to stop with the president and world leaders doing a coordinated press conference to disclose the truth of the NHI reality here on Earth. For our United Planetary Society as a whole, that will be just the beginning of the next phase of our growth and evolution with this knowledge. But as the Colonel alludes, there are societal dangers. This is where long-held norms, traditions, and the status quo will start to break down. Think about how this will impact religion, the sciences, energy sectors, capital markets, politics, and even interpersonal relations. These are likely what Colonel Nell is referencing about questions the government is not ready to answer. But also need to remember, not all of this change will be bad. And eventually, when we all come out on the other side together, better off as a species that is more united with a better understanding of the greater truths that we all live under, and hopefully dodge the potential existential catastrophes staring us all in the face at the moment. However, and shockingly not shocking, the power brokers of the world, like the military-industrial complex, religious institutions, massive consumer corporations, energy sector giants, just to name a few, could and very likely will either directly or indirectly attempt to put the brakes on all this, regardless of how badly we need it, purely out of the fear of losing their market value and more likely their control over status quo societal influences and power. And if anyone in those positions says that preventing a stock market collapse is a legitimate reason to not disclose, if that's what it takes and it will help us take the next steps of evolving our species' dysfunctional society, then I say, hey, you better tighten your damn seatbelt. Not to be reckless here, I acknowledge that this is an extremely precarious juncture to be crossed, and where our leaders must be brave and not let the ugly, ignorant human greed and lust for money and power blind their decision makings in this moment. This juncture will be a tipping point that will allow us to climb out of the destructive and archaic modalities that have dominated our planet for the last 100 years at least, and progress us forward together as the global family that we are, in a balanced existence for each other and our environment. Or we will be swallowed by our inability to learn our lessons that our planet, and according to most abductees, the NHI presence is so desperate for us to understand. We must live in balance and harmony with our home environment, or we are in deep. We are a parasite on this planet. We take and take and take, and essentially give very little, if anything, back into the raw cycles of nature. Colonel Nell was asked by moderator Alex if what he was implying with some of his statements that we're not ready as a society for disclosure.
I guess I would draw an analogy, though, for people that believe in a certain faith tradition, whatever that faith tradition is, and hold to that and subscribe to that in a very serious and devout way, and sort of pose the question, even for folks of that ilk, and I would count myself as one, you're confronted with the reality of your religious belief system, like the reality of the metaphysical, an angel, a messenger from God, what have you, that's going to be a sea state change in your way of dealing with reality, right? Even though you already believe it. So it's one thing to believe and it's another to know. And I think in this context, this phenomena has the potential for an analogous effect both on the individual and on society.
And I find it interesting that when asked if society is ready for this reality, that Karl Nell makes the analogy here to metaphysical beings and devout spiritual beliefs. What would happen to most mortal humans when faced with the reality of the metaphysical appearing in front of them? If you saw the Virgin Mary, or Jesus, or an apparition like an angel or a messenger from God literally materialize in front of you, that would be extremely challenging to digest, even for those of deep, devout religious beliefs. So if some elements of the phenomenon fall within a metaphysical category, as Nell seems to imply, beyond how would an average person process that, how would a government explain this to their entire society? And this is likely also a question our leaders clearly aren't ready or currently even capable of answering. One of the most widely debated narratives around UFOs and the NHI reality is whether or not they represent a literal threat to our species and planet. Considering they, as in NHI, seems to have been here on this planet as long as we have, if not much longer, it would seem odd for them to wait until we're more militarily equipped with nuclear and other modern weapons before they decided to attack or invade. If their intention was to wipe us out or invade our planet, why didn't they do that back in the Stone Ages? Or any time prior to the last 70, 80 years when we have developed atomic weapons? It seems rather odd and a terrible war tactic to wait until your opponent has grown vastly stronger and more sophisticated before you go to war with them. Maybe they wanted a bigger challenge? Or maybe the threat narrative is bullshit, designed to scare us and keep us obedient. The reality, however anyone wants to spin it, is we don't have any damn idea what their intentions are, which is a major reason the US and other world governments have kept a lid on disclosure. Not many leaders want to stand up and say, yes, there is higher intelligence here, always has been. They appear to be light years ahead of us in their technological, spiritual, and consciousness evolution. We don't have any real idea about their true intentions, nor can we do anything about them one way or another. So what does Karl Nell think about the idea of NHI representing a threat?
The universe is governed by conservation laws, and it's probably reasonable to assume that laws of nature that we understand apply everywhere. We may have incomplete understanding, undoubtedly we do, of these laws, but they're sort of homogeneous and they apply throughout the universe. And so those laws are governed by conservation rules. There's conserved quantities. And so this reality really forces a Darwinian type competition in order to survive. And so it's reasonable to assume any other civilization that's evolved has come up through the same Darwinian evolutionary process. So I think it's naive to expect complete altruism until and unless you get to a state of post-scarcity, where you essentially have no physical needs that we're kind of encumbered with in this universe.
You mentioned universal laws of conservation. We as a species have an incomplete understanding of these laws or rules. For proof of this, all you have to do is look at our current model that is based on creating value from harvesting, selling, or otherwise consuming scarce resources. Every day, we flagrantly rape and pillage our home planet, all in the name of attaining more of the ultimate false profit, money.
And so in some sense, it's the economics of the future that are going to determine whether there's cooperation, competition, or some kind of symbiosis and inform the intention. But to assume either malintent or complete altruism, I think is somewhat naive.
Can we move beyond our ego and let go of scarcity? Even if it meant a healthy symbiosis with a more evolved non-human intelligence here on Earth, what are the odds our greed and scarcity mindsets wouldn't continue to prevail in guiding our current trajectory? Full steam ahead towards a possible collapse of the current structure of our modern human society. What if we knew? What if we all had the understanding of how dire our situation could actually be? How close we are to the razor's edge? What if we had the information to make the right decisions to avoid catastrophe? Would all that the gatekeepers have figured out and not figured out to this point elicit philosophical implications to the best of our collective understanding and help us realize a bigger picture? Would disclosure not then be inevitable? If you ask the Colonel, he not only thinks it's inevitable, he believes disclosure is already happening.
Again, people that sort of look at this topic and study it, and there have been some good examinations on this from a historical standpoint, have realized that, like, we're not in really a new state. Like, this sort of disclosure emphasis has come and gone over time. And so this is not the first time we've arrived at this stage. I would suggest that maybe the peak of this current cycle happened last December with the Schumer amendment, and then it got rolled back as defeated in the House. And so it remains to be seen, if the process could continue.
Current cycle is an interesting way to look at this. This movement cycles through society periodically and is able to breach the mainstream consciousness enough to be discussed widely. When it does, so far, the gatekeepers have incredibly been able to suppress it and push it back underground through good old tried and true stigma, ridicule, obfuscation, and flat out lies from industry or government insiders. This is why many have very little faith in our elected officials around this topic. Many see them as part of the problem, as they are part of the government. But it's important to remember that the government isn't a monolithic beast. Far from it. It's a fractured army with a million different factions, all trying to outdo each other and achieve their particular objectives. And to be fair, they are most often focused on outdoing their rival in the next election as their main objective. But the UFO topic is astonishing in its ability to stand apart in true bipartisan interest and cooperation. Of all the petty BS that gets thrown back and forth, there aren't many, if any, topics that can bring opposing political views to work together. The NDAA Schumer Amendment was a bipartisan push led by Senator Schumer, who's a Democrat, and Senator Rounds, who's Republican, and is a perfect example of this.
So this is, a bipartisan colloquy on a topic that I guess most people would probably consider fringe, and yet these two senators felt the need to do that and to double down on their desire to see this through. So hopefully we'll see maybe a reintroduction of some version of that this summer, with the goal of maybe putting it into the NDAA by the end of the year.
Because, like it or not, the full force of our government officials will be needed if we have any hope of getting any sort of legislation passed to compel gatekeepers, contractors, or employees on the inside of something like the UFO secret to come forward. My bet is these actors are deeply intertwined in the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex. Those types aren't used to answering to anyone. Just look at what the brave souls who spoke out against Boeing in 2024, who are now 6 feet under. Now, I'm not saying that Boeing killed anyone or has UFO contracts or materials, but they are definitely part of the same industry. And clearly, these people don't play by the rules. And they sure as hell aren't going to answer to the general public without the full weight of the federal government behind us. So, using the leverage of the factions who are fighting the good fight for disclosure are our most effective route to legally compel those who may know to come forward. Which leads us to the question, who leads this dialogue publicly on the global stage moving forward? Traditionally, we, the damn US Yanks, have insisted on leading the line on pretty much whatever topic or narrative we decide. However, this is very much a worldwide phenomenon, and a phenomenon by the way, that likely doesn't give two spits about our imaginary lines in the dirt. So then, how much should the US lead the discussion globally?
So this is an interesting question too, because this is a global phenomenon and it's affecting other countries just like the United States. The reporting on this is clear over decades. Other countries have reported this stuff. And not only that, the Vatican has come out and made statements that reference or tangentially reference this topic. So organized religion has a say in this topic as well. So it's really a whole of planet, whole of humanity problem. So the U.S. has got its role to play, but these other countries have their role to play, and it would behoove us to recognize that U.S. action can be preempted by another party, and it would be probably more conducive to work collectively.
Whole of planet, whole of humanity problem. U.S. action could be preempted by other nations. It would behoove us to work together. Hello, CIA, NSA, NGO, all you IC agency goons, are you listening? Defense contractor cartels, are you listening? This is bigger than your net profits, bigger than your stock prices and lust for power. Is all the money they can't take with them worth the greedy demise of their own species? I wonder if their grandchildren will admire their actions or be disgusted by their short-sighted decisions. Only time will tell, because one thing is for sure, the truth will always, always eventually come out. So as we've discussed here and in episodes past, Colonel Nell is a towering figure with extraordinary experience in military, aerospace, defense, and for me, has some of, if not the strongest statements on record about not only the non-human intelligence existence, but of captured materiel and reverse engineering programs attempting to weaponize and monetize that tech. I appreciate that SALT host Alex pressed the Colonel on this idea, especially considering Nell's past statements on the record for the debrief article in early June of 2023. Quote, his assertion concerning the existence of a terrestrial arms race occurring sub rosa over the past 80 years, focusing on reverse engineering technologies of unknown origin, is fundamentally correct, as is the indisputable realization that at least some of these technologies are of unknown origin or derived from non-human intelligence. And so, under oath statements of whistleblowers like David Grush about reverse engineering programs and the arms race should not be viewed lightly or as fantasy. So tell us again, Colonel, the reverse engineering arms race happening around the world is real, right?
So I think some of what you say is a reasonable conclusion to be drawn. I've suggested something similar in past statements. The point here, though, is to go from a pre-disclosure to a post-disclosure world, maybe two stable states that are separated by an unstable middle ground.
This unstable period, in mitigating its severity, seems to be one of the most pressing concerns of Colonel Nell. This was also a similar thesis of his Seoul conference presentation in November of 2023, and again is re-emphasized here.
And so how you make that transition, again, this speaks to the concern about this catastrophic disclosure. And this has come up in sort of arms regulation too. Mutually assured destruction, however much we don't like it, is sort of a stable kind of, geostrategic regime. The Reagan era defense shield idea is also a very stable scenario, but to go from one to the other is very unstable. Yeah. And so this topic sort of mirrors that.
Just in case you're not familiar, mutually assured destruction is the concept that everyone has nuclear weapons pointed at each other and no one wants to actually use them because if anyone was crazy or stupid enough, everyone would fire back basically instantly and we'd all be smoked in about half an hour. See Annie Jacobson's work for more details on this extremely terrifying reality that the world currently lives under 24/7, 365. And with Nell's statements here, this only furthers the notion he is going to be a key figure moving deeper into the modern disclosure era. So how do we span the unstable gap? What do we need to know about the phenomenon and its intentions? SALT host Alex brings up a good point. To really understand the NHI phenomenon, do we need to further our understanding of reality itself? Is it even possible to grasp as simple humans? Is this, or at least part of the phenomenon, fundamentally unknowable to us?
So it's a totally philosophical, epistemological question, right? Really about the nature of knowledge itself, right? Like, how can we know what we know, and how can we be sure about what we know? I guess personally, I subscribe to the idea that there is an ultimate truth, and that humanity, being created in the image of a higher power, is endowed with the quality to pursue an understanding of that. And so part of our objective in this existence is to seek that out and try to understand that ultimate truth to a greater and greater degree. And this would be a component of that, obviously.
Yeah. How can we know what we know? And how can we be sure what we know? Maybe in our current paradigm, we can't be sure what we know. Because until we reach the level of the creative spark of all that is, or the Godhead that knows and sees all, there is no way to know for sure that what we know is 100% accurate to any final level of complete and total knowledge. However, there are ultimate truths in this universe, and we are endowed to know and understand those because, as the Colonel so eloquently and poignantly puts it, the nature of reality is not fundamentally government information. And with so many unknowns within the topic of UFOs, consciousness, fundamental nature of reality beyond our world, there is clearly much, much more we need to learn and understand. If you haven't seen my first episode on who Karl Nell is, make sure you take a look, which I will link below and at the end of this video. It will help you get a solid understanding of why so many see it as extraordinary that he is making continued statements about the existence of a higher intelligence engaging our planet and species. It also shows how mind-blowing ridiculous it is that no one from any large mainstream media outlet is saying anything about Colonel Nell and his statements. It just doesn't make any logical sense in what is and should be considered by every journalist and outlet on the planet as the greatest story in human history. Crazy. That's why it's so important that more people hear these stories and statements from people in stratospheric positions like Colonel Nell. If you'd like to help this story spread, to help open more eyes and minds, then please leave a comment on this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you want to be more proactive in spreading the word, then please share this with someone who might find the UFO and non-human intelligence reality interesting. You can also support this project directly by becoming a member on Patreon or picking up some merch from the online store. Again, links below. If you want to see that first Colonel Nell video, either for the first time or as a refresher, then that video is linked at the end here. And until that next time, thank you for watching. My name is Jason. This has been Beyond Strangeness. I'll see you again soon. Take care, my friend.